Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mindfulness with Mark Bianchi. This is my second show. As you may have watched last week's show, I had Deb Goldberg, who is a divine therapist and a good friend of mine now. And we were kind of introing the show and talking about how money matters affect our well-being, they affect our spiritual centeredness, they most definitely affect our peace of mind. And that brought me to, coming up with this week's topic, which is the sandwich generation. So we're not going to be making any food. We're not turning this into a culinary hour by any means. But what we're going to be talking about, if you're not familiar with that term, the sandwich generation refers to the age group of people kind of between about 35 to 60, give or take a few years. People who are busy, extremely busy, actually overwhelmed very often because they're taking care of grown adult children very often, trying to get them on their 2 feet. They're also taking care of their aging parents. And that can be a lot. That can be a lot for anybody, even the most organized and together person. That's a lot to take care of. So basically it becomes, you're living this balancing act. And so, I thought this is a perfect topic for the Enlightened World Network and the Enlightened Living channels, because it's anything that breaks down our well-being or our peace of mind, and interferes with that and overwhelms us, can really take us away from that peaceful, centered feeling. And I kind of make it my mission to help people. As a financial coach also, and a life coach, I talk to those behaviors that set us up for kind of hardships in life. And I like to come up with solutions and problem solve ways around and dealing with some of these things. And I especially like when I can bring a little authenticity to the table and talk about stuff that I've experienced myself. Excuse me. And this is one of those things I can definitely talk to from personal experience. So I just wanted to say that I call it kind of, when you have adult parents and they're getting older and older, it's almost like you're dealing with an aging in reverse issue. And to give you a little bit of statistics, I always kind of like to throw out some statistics at the very beginning. Approximately 47 to 50% of people in that 45 to 60 year age group are assisting elderly parents. And that form of assistance, it's not only about, medical stuff. It can be financial, it can be daily living stuff, helping them brush their teeth. I mean, it can be anything. Financial stuff, legal stuff. You become not only like a caregiver, a caretaker, but there's a lot of oversight. So you find your life is kind of becoming overwhelmed because you've got oversight of your grown children. You're trying to get them on their own 2 feet. You're also trying to look out for your mom and dad, or your mom or your dad, one or the other. With me, it was my mom. It still is my mom. So I can talk to this, pretty much. Most of the people surveyed actually found that dealing with the adult parents was actually more challenging than the than their own kids, getting the kids up, because kids get a little bit more independent every day. With parents and aging parents, and all of us, it's happening with all of us. So this is not meant in any way to point a finger at anyone who's elderly. And by all means, I also want to clarify, there are people who live to be 100 who are sharp as a tack until the day they die. However, most of us, we start to have some issues, whether those be physical or a little bit of cognitive decline, or just we need maybe just some assistance as we get older. It just happens. But I don't want to ever paint a picture that generalizes or stereotypes or anything like that. So how does this fit into money? Well, a lot of the people in the sandwich generation, they're financially supporting their grown children still, either 100% or 50% or whatever, trying to get them on their own. And they're very often because a lot of these costs are not covered with aging. They're not covered by insurance necessarily. The help that you get sometimes that's covered is minuscule. And so if you don't have resources, or if your parents don't have resources, it can be quite challenging. So I'm going to talk today about the feelings we experience as we go through that, and also solutions. And a lot of this is from personal experience. And that's just what I want to say is that I have lived this, I'm living it now, and it's a balancing act, and it requires some real skills that you learn as you go along. It's an ever dynamic, evolving process. So I just wanted to say, that stress can really be overwhelming. And I understand that. The medical costs, you don't have much in the line of support really at all. Often, even if you do get help, then you're faced often, especially if you're like me and you have issues with trying to be a perfectionist, which we all know how futile that can be sometimes. If you do get help, sometimes help that you get from a caregiver or whatever, you're going to be just as busy wanting to supervise that they're doing everything okay and up to your standards, even though they may be absolutely wonderful. You're going to be checking that out all the time too. So it becomes type of oversight to the other. However, I do believe that getting help where you can, whatever is available, is one of the key solutions that I'm going to be discussing with this topic. You can, with the aging of the parents, your responsibility increases. With kids, it's kind of the opposite, at least hopefully it's the opposite. As your child is getting older into their 20s, maybe they have a degree, maybe they've gone to trade school, something like that, you're hopefully getting ready to toss them out of the nest a little bit, but with parents, it's going in the opposite direction. So very often, okay, not in every 100% of the cases. I know people who are in their 80s and 90s who are completely together and haven't lost any cognitive ability whatsoever. But in a lot of cases, it's going in the opposite direction. So that's what makes it so very, very challenging. And these sandwiched people are in the middle. Like, think of the filling inside of a sandwich. Then one piece of bread would be your children that you're trying to get on their own, and the other piece of bread would be your adult parents. You're stuck in the middle. You're the filling. So, but you're holding both pieces of bread together. So it can lead to a lot of depression, anxiety, guilt. There's all kinds of feelings you can experience with that. I wanted to also say that when it comes to solutions, there's all kinds of stories, and sometimes you just have to laugh at some of the things that happen in your life. That's the only way you can really cope with them. Because one of the solutions that a friend of mine offered me one time when I was handling a full-time job, working 40 plus hours a week, handling a house, handling my own responsibilities, helping with my husband, helping with my mom, who was living 8 to 10 miles away at the time, and going to see her basically every day, and spending hours helping her with financial issues, care issues, house issues, bill issues, writing checks, whatever. The gamut is huge. Think of everything you do for yourself and having to oversee every aspect of that for someone else. So, but one of the humorous things, and where I had to just get a little chuckle in retrospect especially, is one of my friends, when they said to me, well, Mark, you just need to find a little time to meditate. Well, that's a lovely thought, and I am completely pro meditation. Believe me, it has its value. It brings a lot of value and a lot of peace to ourselves and our souls. But when you're basically operating on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, because the rest of the day you don't have time to breathe, because you're overwhelmed with obligations and responsibilities, it's almost it's really hard to fathom, somebody saying, well, you just need to find time to meditate. Okay, if I had one spare minute, I'd love to do that. So just a little bit of a funny story, kind of, from, my past. I'm sure other people have gotten advice. And while it's always the advice like that, it's always meant well. People mean it well. It's one of those things like, sometimes I just want to vent to you. I don't necessarily need you to fix it for me or try to fix it for me. Sometimes I'm just venting, and just acknowledge me and acknowledge that I'm frustrated, acknowledge that I'm overwhelmed. I know there's no easy solution for this, but listening to a meditation tape for an hour is not going to take the 50 other responsibilities that I have off of my plate. And so I think anybody who's been there as a caregiver, whether it's parents, children, grown children, or both, and juggling all the responsibilities, can completely relate to what I'm saying. So with that said, we experience that depression, the anxiety, we experience guilt. Guilt is very, very common. And you might ask yourself, like, where does guilt come in with this whole thing? Well, the guilt comes in with not being able to feel like you're spreading yourself so thin, you're burning 18 candles at both ends, for lack of a better way to put it, that you don't feel like you're giving your relationships in your life your all. So whether it's your husband, your wife, even your job, your relationship with your job, your relationship with your coworkers, you may not be feeling, it might not be true, it may not be accurate, but you may not be as much of a team player as you were when you didn't have all this responsibility. And you need to cut yourself a little bit of slack, because you can only do so much. But since we are about mindfulness with money, we are going to talk about and tie this back to the money angles. Guilt can even come in, though, when it comes to the money, because you may be taking money or savings or whatever, investments, and putting them toward paying for parental care when maybe years prior to that, your original plan with that money was to use it toward your children's education, toward getting your children off your feet. And you may not have now that bucket of money, for lack of a better word, that was supposed to go for one thing is now going towards something else. And that can lead to feelings of guilt. It really can. What you find is when you're an empathetic person, you have this innate ability and this innate desire to want to solve problems for people and things. That's one of the perfectionistic tendencies also that can go along with that, can make it extremely challenging, because not only are you feeling everybody around you's pain, but now you're also you're compounding everything you're feeling with your perfectionist tendencies. And so that's the overriding message here is you want to give yourself a break and realize at some level here that you can't be perfect, that you can't do everything. You're not Superman, you're not Superwoman. And so, don't be afraid to ask for help when it comes to these issues. Whether it's support, whether it's support groups, therapy, coworkers, friends, whoever you need as a sounding board or whatever, or support groups help a lot with these issues. So let's see. We can be so afraid of making a mistake when it comes to all these things that we're doing, and that can even add and compound to the stress as well. So let's talk about the challenges that we're dealing with, particularly when it comes to the aging parents. So we all know that children, we kind of expect children to be rebellious. We expect them to defy us once in a while. It may not happen all the time, but it's sort of expected. But when you take the role of a parent who's used to being your parent your whole life, and those roles start to reverse a little bit, then you start to get into the combativeness. If you add a little dementia, or let's say Alzheimer's or something like that into the mix, that combativeness can get amped up to just unbelievable proportions. So let's see. So I do have actually a personal story about that, because as many adult children have had to have that conversation about the driver's license with their parents, the driver's license issue is just really one of those topics. When you approach that, it's just be ready because, you know, I was following my mom one time to driving when she was driving home. I forget why, but I just noticed that she was not staying in her lane like I had noticed her driving before. And so she was kind of a little bit all over the place. And so it occurred to me, okay, it may be time to have that conversation. So of course that was met with just an incredible amount of combativeness and challenge, because let's face it, none of us like the idea of losing our independence. So that's what it really boils down to is, you know, you're kind of, in a way, you know, you're taking somebody's independence away. And in a lot of cases, you know, that person will realize, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not driving as well as I used to. But so the protective aspects of your personality, you know, you don't want to see your mother or your father get into an accident. You don't want to see somebody else get hurt, some innocent person. So you have to have that conversation. The problem is, you know, you're combating somebody who still thinks very often that they're perfectly capable. They're like, what's the issue? I don't see a problem. Of course you don't. You can't follow yourself when you're driving. So with that said, you know, those are difficult conversations. It requires tremendous oversight. And I think that the burdens come in where you have to, you kind of you have oversight, because with a child or an adult, a young adult child, let's say, you know where they are most of the time. They're in school, they're at home, they're doing their homework or whatever. You know, they're at a friend's house. You know that parent, whatever. But when it's with a parent that is like that, you're starting to notice like some mistakes and things like that, you have to really amp up that oversight, because, you know, they can be anywhere because they think they can still do it all. And you may be noticing like, no, that's just not the case. So that's where that big stress comes in. There's often not enough hours in a day to take care of everything that you need. The burden can be amplified because, you know, especially like if you're an only child, or maybe you are the child that lives closest. So the majority of the responsibility is yours. You know, there's many reasons. It's nice when it's a shared responsibility, but that's not always the case. It often gets, you know, for lack of a better word, dumped on one child. And so if that person is taking care of a parent and also trying to get two children on their own 2 feet and juggling a job, that's really a lot to deal with. You find that you are supporting not only physically and mentally and emotionally, but often financially. And this is where, you know, you have to have the discussions of, you know, how to help solve this. You know, what can you do? What kind of financial boundaries do you need to set up and agree to? What can you handle? What do you need to get help for? Those are all decisions and discussions that have to be had in order to deal with this. And then also to, you know, let's not forget, as the show states, mindfulness with our money. We have to not only, you know, think about our children's future, we have to think about our parents getting the best care possible because we love them. And also we have to love ourselves, and we have to think about our future and our comfort and our security, and, you know, at least having a roof over our heads as we get into older age. And this stress on people between 50 and 65 is incredible, because you're no spring chicken anymore. I mean, I say this all the time, you know, it's one thing when you're raising kids and you're 30. It's another thing when you're juggling all of this and you're 58 or 60, like, you know, like I'm 58. So, you know, it's not that easy. And, you know, sometimes you just need somebody to vent to. But let's just, you know, the really important thing to remember is not to self-neglect. You want to really, really not neglect the things that are important to you. Don't want to neglect anything that is a part of your life. Relationships, Don't, you want to try to not neglect your relationships that you have in your life, with your job, with your coworkers, with your friends, with your spouse, your partner, whatever that may be. You're trying to keep your own house in order, and at the same time, you're keeping 2 other people's or 3 other people's, 4 other people's houses in order. So it can be very, very burdensome and stressful. Don't be afraid to seek that help, though. Whatever that help may be, maybe there's a call line at your job or whatever that you can help, to just have a sounding board, a support group. There are support groups out there. I was surprised when I found out, there are caregiver support groups out there. And that does help, even if it's just somebody to vent to or somebody to commiserate with. Sometimes that can mean everything. That can really, lower your blood pressure, for lack of a better word. And give yourself a break also, because, you're only one person. You're not Superman, like I said before. You're not Superwoman. You're only one person. And so, I also want to emphasize, I remember in the 70s and 80s, it was always a big therapy thing to go scream into a pillow or whatever it takes. Go into a quiet, dark room somewhere and just scream, or, or have a good cry if that's what it takes. It's okay. It's okay to you don't have to be emotionally and mentally and physically perfect all the time and put those strains and stresses on you to be like that all the time. It's okay to lose it a little bit once in a while and just let off some steam. That's all right. You're entitled. You're supporting 2 generations in many, many ways. You have to love yourself. That's number one. It includes peace of mind, your spirit, paying attention to your spirit, like Enlightened World Network is all about. And yes, your finances. The financial strains of all of this can be really, really, really huge. They really are. And my throat's a little dry, but anyway. So what are all the solutions? Well, you need to forgive yourself. That's number one. You need to forgive yourself. You're not perfect. You were not meant to take care of 3 or 4 or 5 people forever and ever and ever. So forgive yourself and let yourself off the hook. That's very, very important. One of the things I'd also like to talk about, which ties back more into what I do, and with my financial services background and being a financial coach, is as early as possible and in a proactive way, because an ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure. It's worth 10 pounds of cure. So wherever you can with kids as they're growing up, teach them about budgeting, because that's only going to make your life easier as well, and theirs, of course. If you teach them at an early age how to just juggle the expenses in their life, and teach them the difference between wants and needs as early as possible, a little bit of that is going to go really a long way. And whenever you're having these discussions with them about them coming back to live with you, my opinion, it should always be approached as a transitory solution. It should never be like a permanent solution. Those boundaries, those discussions, they kind of need to be set up. Because it's one thing with parents, they're getting older and they can't really help it. We age, it's a natural part of life, but it's part of nature for the mama bird to kick the baby birds out of the nest, and it's time to fly, And so I know we love our children, we love our adult parents, but with children, it really shouldn't be like, I'm going to support you forever and ever and ever. It has to be like, well, what can we do with budgeting skills? What can we do with saving this money that I'm affording you the ability to save by having you live with me, instead of going out and buying the latest 2019 vehicle because you're living cheaper? That shouldn't be the attitude, and that shouldn't be allowed. And nobody's judging here, but if we're focusing on solving problems and we're focusing on solutions, then the way to do that is to break apart the problems and break apart the issues that are affecting our lives, and think about what we can do to change those things and to change the behaviors behind what's driving these actions that are happening. And often, you know, if a child is living with you, there should be some major discussions happening about, well, okay, I want you to be saving X amount, X percentage of what you're making. Are you making enough money? Do you need some training? Can you teach yourself some computer skills? You know, is there a trade school that you would like to go to? All those discussions should be had because they're all part of the bigger picture, and they relate back to, you know, taking some burden off of you, because you can't be the caretaker of the world. That's the very definition of this sandwich generation, and it's why we have some of these burdens in our lives, is because the last thing you want to be is an enabler. And when you're an empath, you often are walking that fine line between helping somebody and then becoming an enabler. And the last thing that you want to do is become the enabler. So it should all be geared toward, let's teach you how to budget. Let's teach you how to look at career advice. Do you need a session with a career coach? There are great articles out there. Not all services are, a fee. Not all services are based on a fee. There are a lot of free services out there. There's career counseling services. Sometimes, you might need one or two of those. Career advice, skills advice. We're all as marketable as our skills are. So those are all great discussions to avoid, having 40-year-old children still living with you. So with that said, so it all boils back to, you're not gonna be get it all done perfectly, but it's all moving steps in the right direction, and it's about taking those smaller pieces of the puzzle and drilling down. So very often with the parent, you may have to actually consider, because there is very little financial help out there available when it comes to even our Medicare and things like that. There's very limited coverage of daycare for adults, or any kind of care or assisted care for an adult. Very often that's paid for out of pocket. So in a way to manage costs, and I know this is a difficult discussion to have, because we're all we become set in our ways, and we're used to our personal space and our home space and all of that. But you may want to consider having that adult parent come and live with you, as a way to A, have better oversight, B, financially declutter and financially get things a little more in order and cut down on costs. So that's very often an avenue that people look at. And I can't honestly emphasize this next point enough, but I want to just say, organize, 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 because I think that one of the biggest things that helps us deal with all of these issues, the more stressed you become, the thinner that you're spreading your span of responsibility, the more people you're taking care of, the more I think it's critical to declutter even your living space, declutter your organization of your files, your folders, whether you're very tech literate or whether you're still using a filing cabinet or you're doing both. It really helps to have your life organized, because that organization is going to help you keep all of those daily responsibilities, those appointments and things like that in check. You're going to have your legal things ready. You're going to have your financial house ready. Have your plans discussed with an estate planning attorney, because you don't want to have issues happen with the cognitive ability of your parents and realize, oh my God, I really should have had a power of attorney in place a long time ago. So, you want to look into maybe getting durable powers of attorney, things like that, living wills, all those things. We should all have those things. But when you come into that caregiver responsibility aspect of your life, and you're trying to be keep it together mentally, physically, and yes, financially. You want to be as organized as possible. You want to have your paperwork in line. You want to talk to an attorney if you can get everything, organized for yourself. So, I mean, I really do think that being organized is one of the biggest helps you can have. Um, and you also, let's not forget, you don't want to neglect, as I said before, you don't want to neglect yourself, because you're of very little value to other people if you neglect your health, your own health. You need to make yourself a priority, or at least one of the priorities. So, and that's one of the key components, and the key commonalities among caregivers is we tend to put other people ahead of ourselves. And if you get burned out and you get a disease and you get sick or you get laid up or you, God forbid, die, what help are you then to your, to your parents at that point? What help are you to your age, to your children who you're trying to get on their 2 feet too? And your spouse, let's not forget them. It's a real juggling act, but you've got to put yourself at the top of that list, or you're of very little value to anybody else. So join a support group, make time for that. See if there are, people you can talk to in your area that have similar experiences. Be mindful of the money, seek financial counseling. I can't emphasize that enough, because very often with all of this stress that we go through, the last thing that you need on top of that, and it's almost impossible to avoid, the last thing we need is to be super financially stressed about it. So where you can get financial counseling and talk to a financial advisor, or even a financial coach like myself that can help you with budgeting and behaviors and things like that. But often, in tandem, a financial advisor and a financial coach could be worth the minimal investment that it requires to get things back on track. It's really not a bad idea, because it often boils down to the behaviors that we have that drive us to make these decisions, and let life become super overwhelming for us. So in closing, I just want to, to say that the purpose of my show, Mindfulness with Mark Bianchi, is to talk about money matters, and that's the pivotal point, the main topic of the show. But the reason it's such a good fit on Enlightened World Network is that all of these things, when you drill them down in our lives, these are a lot of the issues that lead us to that stress, that lead us to having these stressors, and this seeking mindfulness through meditation and through seeking peace of mind, trying to become more centered, trying to become more spiritual, trying to figure out what your purpose is. It's all that juggling. And part of my mission as a person and also as a financial coach is I want to help people figure that out, that, that you're not perfect, that you need to forgive yourself. You need to make time for you. And through all of it, the money aspect is huge. It's really, really huge, because that can lead to so many of the other domino effect stresses in our life. And so in closing, I guess we're not going to go the full hour today. I think I kind of exhausted this. But that sandwich generation, I think it's just, it's a topic that really needs to be brought to the forefront, because there's so many people out there, really, really good people that are doing so much caregiving, and they don't get enough credit in our society. And I kind of wanted to use this show also to give a huge shout out to all of the people out there, whether you're doing it for somebody else, whether you're doing it for, whether that's your occupation, or whether you're taking care of, children and adult parents, adult children and aging parents at the same time, whether you don't have children like me, but you are taking care of, an aging parent. in addition to to yourself, I think it's worth calling out and just giving people who do this a huge kudos, because they deserve it, because it can become one of the most stressful times of your life, at a time when you're hoping to kind of go into your golden years with a little bit of peacefulness and peace of mind, and where you'd love to see things starting to relax. Things are often starting to actually amp up because the responsibility just can become huge. So it's what I do as a financial coach is I can help people who are younger, who are just getting started in the workforce, but I could also help somebody who is, maybe in that 50s and 60s range, like I am, try to deal with, how do you financially juggle all this stuff? How can you emotionally put it in perspective so you can handle all these things? How can I help you make yourself a priority? That's one of the things I would look at. I think that anytime you're a coach, you have to bring a little bit of life coaching into it as well. I don't think you could be a financial coach and never talk about life coaching and behaviors and things like that, because it all drives down to, behaviors. And one of my missions that I feel in life is I want to help people make smart choices. And it certainly isn't because I've always made the smartest choices. It's kind of the opposite, actually. I think that being a natural perfectionist, it's part of my innate abilities, my innate personality, I mean. But that can be a dual-edged sword, because you can be really, really hard on yourself because you don't want to make mistakes. But we're all bound to make mistakes. And so I hopefully can shed some light on my own personal experiences, both with money, both with juggling responsibilities, with making yourself a priority, with feeling stress, and trying to choose the best behaviors in our life, because all those behaviors that we choose have domino effects. They all lead to consequences. All of our actions have consequences. So you want to try to always make the smartest choices possible. And sometimes it's as simple as just trying to decompress. This is where talking to somebody else who's gone through it can really, it sounds like it's a trite solution. Oh, talking to somebody, what's that going to do for me? But what it can do is, you might hear another perspective, and you might hear what worked for that person. And you might look at something in a different light and say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. That really would help. And so that's where, support groups and talking with somebody else really comes in to play. Making those financial decisions, that smart financial decisions, planning, like the the little icon there says at the top of the slide, planning, pointing in a direction, realizing that you're not going to be in your 20s forever, you're not going to be in your 30s forever. The day is going to come when you're in your 50s, when you're in your 60s, and you don't want to work forever. You want to hopefully have made smart decisions all along the line so that you can ease into retirement. And retirement is not about rusting, sitting there and resting until you rust. Like the old saying, if you only rest, you rust. I forget exactly how it goes, but you want to always be evolving, you want to always be growing, but you don't necessarily need a ton of stress as part of that. So when I said about the organizing, that falls into so many categories in our life. Is just organizing doesn't mean having only having like a fastidious white glove type of house that's spotless. It could mean that, but it could also be just like having your paperwork organized, like finding out talking to advisors, talking to a counselor, finding out who the best people are to talk to, and getting things in place ahead of time. If you're in your 30s, if you're in your 40s, realizing that one day you might be called on, to take care of your aging parents. We don't all have kids, and it's harder nowadays too in our society. The job market's not what it used to be. You know, it's not so easy to graduate from college and just go right out and get a job anymore. So nobody's blaming anybody for living at home with their parents. It's oftentimes it's a necessity. But when you're in your 30s, when you're in your 40s, plan for the possibility of these things. Don't let life sneak up on you with the surprises. And that's where the planning, that's where the mindfulness comes in. So the mindfulness is not only about, you know, meditating and reflecting, although that's a part of it, but you want to reflect about these patterns that we're setting up as we're growing, as we're evolving in our jobs, in our lives, and thinking about, you know, not only living for today, but being mindful about the future. And with that, I just want to wrap it up. We're a little bit earlier than our hour, but I also don't want to beat this subject to death. But we're going to have many more shows that talk about the things we need to be mindful about and our mindfulness with the dollar signs and how they relate to our life. So my name is Mark Bianchi. My business is Mindful Money Matters. You can look me up on my Facebook page, Mindful Money Matters LLC. You could contact me if you're interested. It's financial.coach.mark at gmail.com. Don't know what I was thinking with putting those dots in there, but anyway. And so I hope you have enjoyed the show today. And we're going to be doing these on the Enlightened World Network and Enlightened Living channels. I'm going to be doing these every other Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. So I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and I will see you next week. And I will let you know ahead of time what the topic will be. So in the meantime, have a wonderful week, and thank you all for joining. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you've all found this interesting, and I will see you on our next show. Bye-bye.